Good morning, everyone. Okay, so I will build on what Aitel Madani has started, and in the field of education, okay, or in the field of studying human learning, there were three main streams, okay, of human learning theories. Okay, the first one, as Aitel Madani presented, is the behaviorist theory, learning theory. The second one is the cognitive, with the starting of the meaningful learning with Osbel, okay? And then the third one, which came later on, is the constructivist theory of learning, okay? And with it, there was the introduction of human psychology by Rogers, okay? So,
just
sure.
open and close a small part concerning the book, teaching, the technology of teaching. Although you have the term technology there, it doesn't talk about technology.
Sure.
So just to correct this, yeah? So because you have mentioned so it talks about technology in terms of using the behaviorist paradigms and rules and principles for teaching. And as you know, the behaviorist principles, they are like programs. Behavioral it's like program instruction. So this is the term referring, this is the meaning of the term technology of teaching. Program instruction using the principles of behaviorism, operant condition, reinforcement, etc. Okay? Yes. It doesn't talk about, always use the term virtually there. Virtually means like generally speaking. Okay?
Yeah. Rogers, in fact, when he introduced his theory of learning, which is called humanistic psychology, has caused a kind of a revolution.
The basis on which we learn about behaviorism.
Yeah. As I said, Rogers, when he introduced his humanistic psychology, has caused a kind of revolution in human learning. Okay, because in the beginning, with behaviorists and the cognitive, they were thinking of a learner or of human when he's learning as a kind of a subject. Okay, now with the humanistic psychology, Rogers shifted to a new term and considering the learner or the human being as an individual. Okay, so and when we are talking here about the individual, we are actually including all the factors that constitute a human being, including his feelings, his emotions, okay, his mind, how he thinks, and also the physical learning. So the humanistic psychology deals more with the affective focus. It has more an affective focus rather than the cognitive, okay? So it's more about how the person feels, okay? How the person reacts, okay? Throughout his feelings and throughout his emotions. In fact, Rogers and Vygotsky share the same ideas, okay? And which will lead later on to the social constructivist. Rogers, as I said, studying human behaviors, which include the learning process, including the learning process. So besides the learning process, there is also a focus on the person as a whole, okay, including the physical, the cognitive, and mainly emotional being. That is to say that the person develops his individual self-concept and sense of existence and inherent, okay? So in learning, it's not about the person learning in an isolated way, okay? So he's learning, or the human being is learning with the interaction of his surrounding, okay? So it's kind of engagement of the person within his surrounding. So it's more about the environment which regulate or which governs the learning of a human being rather than the person himself. So Rogers introduced here a very important term, which is called the fully functioning person, okay? So he thought that, he claimed that a person, he will excel in his learning, okay, if he is put in a non-threatening environment, okay? So an environment which is supportive, okay, which is really helping, peaceful, okay, will really secure, okay, will really help the learner in learning fast, okay, and in really interacting with his surrounding environment and really mastering what he is learning. Of course, here we are not learning about any kind of a language till now, okay? So we are just learning behaviors and cognitive concepts, okay? Some implication for education. So of course the humanistic psychology influenced the field of education, okay, and made the people made educationalists really think about transforming or revitalizing the field of education. So here, a new term which was coined later on, which is called transformative pedagogy, okay? In it, there is a shift in the field of education towards the learning, okay, toward the learning process instead of the teaching, okay? So in previous theories, okay, the main focus of education was teaching, okay, or the teaching process, okay? So the focus was more about teaching and more about the teacher himself, okay? Now we shift to the learner itself, okay, and we shift to the importance of the learning process. So the goal of education here with the transformative pedagogy is the facilitation of change and learning. So learning how to learn is more important than spoon feeding the learner and imposing what shall be taught. Okay, so here actually the learner decides on what he wants to learn. Okay, and the learning from now on starts to be a negotiated process. Okay. So it's kind of giving more freedom to the learner to decide about his learning and treating the learner with much more respect and dignity. So here we tend to talk again of the changes of roles of the educator, okay? So towards treating or thinking about the teacher or the educator as a moral facilitator of the learning instead of just the center of the class, okay? So he's just guiding the learner, he's just facilitating the learner. But if we want a teacher to be a facilitator, he should really have some characteristics which are very important, okay? Number one, he should be real, genuine, okay? And discuss mask of superiority. Remember our old teachers in primary school, okay? They were really, when they are in class, yeah, we see them outside, okay, with other teachers. They are very friendly and nice, but once they are in classroom, they completely change, as if they wear some masks, okay? And those masks actually are not the. Sometimes they are forced to wear those masks because of the authority of the system that they have to represent, okay, of the educational system that they have to represent. So what the teacher now with the humanistic psychology, they have to get rid of those masks and be themselves, okay? And they have to try to build trust with their learners to have to be accepted, okay, or put themselves in an accepted situation, okay, and really treat others with dignity, respect their ideas, respect themselves, okay, as human beings. They need to communicate openly and sympathetically. Yeah. So Rogers suggests that the safe and non-threatening learning environment will have a positive effect on the learning of a person. I'm sorry. I guess I went back so fast. Yeah, just a little bit stopping. Okay, so these are some limitations, but again, with the very important concepts that the humanistic psychology brought in the field of education, but of course it has some limitations, okay? So one of them is that teachers may take the non-directive approach too far and thus waste the precious time of learning time in the attempt of allowing learners to discover facts and principles of themselves, okay? The human psychology preaches that we should give more freedom to learners to discover themselves, okay? We should give them more freedom to decide on what they want to learn. But in an attempt for the teachers to give more freedom, okay, to the learners, we tend to we really don't think about the time that we are allowed to give those learners, and managing time is very really important in the learning process. And if we have a non-threatening environment, okay, it will be a loosey environment, okay, in which the learners won't feel very challenged to learn, okay. We all know that a little bit of competitiveness in classroom, okay, a little bit of challenge in classroom, okay, cause a little bit of tension on the learner so as to work a little bit and develops his own learning, okay. If the learner feels that there is no competition, there is no, learning environment is not really challenging, okay, he would feel more comfortable, and he will feel not really stressed a little bit to work on for his learning. So this one is one of its limitations. Rogers, when he brought this, brought his humanistic psychology, he inspired many educationalists later on. Okay, one of them is Paulo Freire, the Brazilian Paulo Freire, which were already seen with the Richard. So Paulo Freire is a Brazilian educator who really objected the fundamentals or the notions of the traditional classroom. Remember, the idea is that the traditional classroom is founded on the notion of banking deposits. Okay, so a classroom is like a bank. The teacher is like the teller, okay, of the bank. He just gives deposits. He just gives debts, okay, and then later on the learners at the end have to return those deposits. Sometimes with a little bit of interest, okay, and then they get in reward those grades, okay. Paulo Freire said no to that concept, okay. He said that concept really lead to mechanical learning, okay. He doesn't give the learner much freedom to think, reflect, analyze, and evaluate things that he is learning. His famous book is called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and has really shaken the field of education in 1970. And it is still one of the important books people still read till now. Thus, students should be allowed to negotiate the learning outcome, compare it with teacher and other students in the process of discovery, engage in critical thinking, relate everything they do in class with their reality outside. Okay, so the classroom should not be an isolated environment, learning environment. Okay, it should be connected with the real world outside. Okay, because the learner have to really use what they are learning inside the classroom. Okay, when they get out. Later on outside the classroom. Now we move on to the implications of the humanistic psychology inside the language teaching classroom, okay? That is what is very important to us. So for this, it's really very important for us as teachers to encourage learners to understand themselves first and communicate openly and non-defensively, okay? So we have to really create a safe environment, a secure environment, let the students to reflect about themselves and let them open or talk openly in a kind of a democratic learning environment. Provide a learning context that facilitates construction of meaningful knowledge and interaction with others, okay? Which we have to try to get rid of rote learning, as Ayat al-Madani presented, okay? And with this we have, even though, to think about what Oswald has said, okay? So meaningful learning is very important for memorizing concepts, okay? Instead of just rote memorizing. And avoid, of course, spoon feeding and loading students with much input. When learners are presented with much input, they tend to close on themselves, okay? So they tend, because they have always this fear that they're gonna fail, okay? That if they don't remember what they are learning, okay, they will be treated with mockery from their friends. They will be punished from their teacher, okay? So here they tend to be defensive in classroom, okay? So we have to try to encourage the learners to think about the classroom as a supportive one instead of just loading the students with much input. Materials and activities should use meaningful contexts of genuine communication that engage students together in the process of becoming a person. Okay, so materials and activities should treat learner in dignity and pushes him to reflect and think. Both Rogers and Freire emphasize on a learner-centered classroom where teacher and students negotiate learning outcomes, engage in discovery, teaming, and relate the course content to students' reality outside of the classroom. And here is a kind of a quick summary to all what still Madani and Rogers have both said. Yeah, so we have those are actually the mainstreams learning theories. Okay, we have the behaviorists, and of course, with the behaviorists, we have the classical and operant theories. We have also the cognitive and then the constructivist approach with which have been initiated by Rogers. You have this figure in your book. Later on, after Rogers, or starting from, we start now to think in the field of human learning about types of learning. Okay, that there is no specific type of learning. Okay, but there are different types of learning. Okay, so Robert Gain demonstrated actually that there are many types of learning. Okay, there are actually 8 types of learning, and he based his demonstration based on all the 3 theories: the behaviorist, the cognitivist, and the constructivist, including Rogers' humanistic theory. These 8 types go from simple ones to complex, from low order learning theories, okay, which do not necessitate much use of the mind, much use of the cognitive aspect, okay, towards the high order learning types of learning, which are really very demanding on the part of the learner. So the first one is the signal learning, okay, which is just a normal stimulus response process, okay, and it's really very conditioned. Number 2 is the stimulus response learning, okay, and here the acquisition of a precise response to discriminated stimulus, connection or discriminated operant, okay. So actually here a stimulus really targets a very specific or precise response. It's not like general like the first one, but it's kind of very, very discriminated response. Why we're calling here discriminated, it means it's very emphasized or precised. Number 3, training. It's the acquisition of 2 or more stimulus response connection. Okay, so we have a constant or a sequence of stimulus response, which we call it a chain. And then we have a verbal association. I'm sorry? The chain? The chain is just a sequence of stimulus response. If we have just one stimulus response, okay, we call it just a signal learning, okay, or a stimulus response learning. Now, when it is repeated, okay, that's called a chain, okay.
It's number 2 repeated.
It's number 2 repeated, yes. It's number 2 repeated. And then we have the verbal association. Number 2. Number 2 is very discriminated. Okay, so we are seeking only a specific response. Now, when we repeat it, okay, so when to get again a similar response but in another behavior. Okay, so that is called a sequence or a chain. Okay.
So there is no complication. It's just a repetition because you said it starts from below.
That's actually what I'm talking about. These 5 first. As I said, there are 8 types of learning. Now the first 5 are low order types of learning. Okay, so there is no the learner here does not he's not required to think about what he's doing. It's just a kind of a stimulus response, but it's just divided in different types of learning. So verbal association, it's mainly a stimulus response on the level of language. Okay. And then the multiple discrimination is learning to make a number of different responses to many different stimuli. So these are actually the low-order types of learning. The three other, which necessitate the person to think and use his mind, are called concept learning, which is acquiring to make a common response to a class of stimuli. Principle learning, it's again a chain or two, concept organizing behavior and experiences. It's a chain of the number 6, a sequence of number 6. And then number 8, which is the highest in the order level of types of learning, which is called problem solving, which necessitate generally the use of the 8 types of learning. Okay, so it's kind of a combination. And in human learning in general, okay, we tend to use one according to the learning type that we are, or according to the context of learning that we are using. But in language learning, we tend to use the 8 sometimes at the same time. Okay, so this is called the high order types of learning. So later on, in the field of second language.
You can do a shot.
Okay.
And then look for the slide you want.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Yeah, so that's it.
Okay.
Play.
Yeah, you play with the parts.
Okay. So in the field of second language, I'm not used to
Yes.
the mic.
Stimulus response.
Which one?
This one.
This one.
Number 35.
35.
Yes. Sorry. Actually, in the field of second language acquisition, okay, later on the educationalists, okay, based their identifications of types of they use the types of learning, okay, to expand, okay, their principles. So they also categorized 8 types of learning of a second language, okay. So they are also based on signal learning, which occur in total language process like emotion, cognitive, verbal, and non-verbal. Stimulus response learning is effective in the acquisition of sound systems of foreign language process of conditioning, trial, and error. Chaining is evident in the acquisition of phonological sequence and syntactic patterns. Verbal association helps in separating between non-verbal chains. And multiple discriminations are necessary in second language learning, where words take on several meaning, or rule in native language is reshaped to fit the context. So it's a kind of differentiating between different words that are in the language and different levels of meaning. And number 6 includes the notion that language and cognition are interrelated. Okay. Number 7, it is an extension of concept learning to the formation of linguistic systems. Okay. And number 8, which is problem solving, is using all the first 7 types, including the 8th type. Okay, in solving a problem that necessitate a verbal communication or interaction. In general, language learning is a combination, as I said, of language concept and conditioning process. They could never be exclusive to each other. Okay, so we cannot use in language one and exclude the other. We have to sometimes use the combination of 4, sometimes the combination of 8, depending on the activities that we are using with the learners. And then later on in the field of education, we started to talk, especially in the field of second language learning. Okay, we start to talk about the transfer, interference, and overgeneralization. Okay, and actually they are also based on all the first theories. And as human learning tend to learn a language, okay, especially second language, okay, we start to think about, we start to observe, or educationalists start to observe that there is a problem with the learners' learning of languages, especially second languages, okay. So sometimes learners make some mistakes. Sometimes they do not utter words the way they want it, okay. So in an attempt to investigate that, so they made some hypotheses, and they came up with the idea that there is actually three processes that the learner go through. Okay, the learner goes through, which are transfer, interference, and overgeneralization. Transfer is the carryover of previous performance or knowledge subsequent learning. Okay, so it's taken with you or carrying with you when you are learning a second language, previous experiences and previous knowledge from the first language, okay, towards the second language. And usually they are divided into two transfers, okay. The first one is called the positive learning, and it's really very effective and impacts positively the learning of the second language. And it's the using of the prior knowledge in the first language to benefit the learning task. Okay, and then the negative transfer, which is the using or generally the previous experience disrupts the learning of a new or performing in a second language task. Negative transfer actually is the interference, so we call it the negative transfer or the interference. And it actually, it's previously learned material interferes with subsequent materials. The former is incorrectly transferred or associated with an item to be learned. Okay, so we have the transfer, we have the positive, and the negative is called the interference. Okay, and it's actually interfering of two languages, okay, with each other, and actually disrupting the learning of the new concepts in the second language. In second language teaching, it is referred to as the interfering of effects of native language language to target language, as it is an immediate and noticeable source of errors among second language learners. You can see some of the problems and interference that sometimes some learners might have. Okay, for example, in French we say "j'ai 30 ans." Okay. A second language learner might say, I have 30, okay? And actually, because in French we say j'ai, okay? Yeah, it's like I have, okay? Another example, je suis à New York depuis janvier. In French we say this, okay? But actually it's a kind of, the interference is using the simple present, okay, with an action that started in the past, okay, and still continuing in the present. Because French doesn't have the present perfect, okay? Yeah. So French, for example, if he is learning, he might say, "I'm in New York since January," okay? These are some examples that you might have in your classrooms. And even Moroccan learners, they still use that. For example, when you are teaching them to talk about their age or tell their age, they still say, I have 15, okay? The native language of a second learner is often positively transferred. So in general, the transfer is not always negative, okay? It's very helpful to the learning process of the second language. However, it depends on its closeness to the target language, okay? So as long as the target language is the native language is close to the target language, it can really help in the positive transfer, okay? As long as they are far from each other, the transfer tend to be more negative rather than positive.
Also, using the Chomskyan principle of universal grammar.
Yeah.
The languages are different. There could be something in all
languages, sure.
If you use the transfer.
Yeah. Teachers usually neglect the facilitating effect of native language on the target language, okay? So we tend to focus only on errors of students, on the negative transfer, okay? And we tend to, because we focus this, we tend to neglect the positive, sometimes positive aspects, because there might be some very positive aspects that could facilitate the learning process of the target language. And then we have overgeneralization, which is the third principle in learning process, in the second learning process. And it's actually a subset of generalization. Generally, learners, when they tend to learn, they tend to generalize, okay? From the native language towards the target language, okay? And mainly, this occurs mainly in generalizing structures, grammar, okay? So it's generally inferring or deriving a rule or a law or a conclusion by observing particular cases. And it's actually a very, though it may seem bad by overgeneralizing, it's a very important strategy in learning that learners use. Ausubel's concept of meaning learning is based on generalization. Items are subsumed, means generalized, under high-order categories of meaningful retention. Okay, so we tend to help the students to memorize in a meaningful way. Okay, generalization occur a lot. For example, in early childhood stages, okay, when a boy or a child, okay, who is familiar with the dog inside home, okay, when he sees a horse for the first time, a 2-year child or a 3-year child, he will call it a dog, okay? That's actually, he's generalizing what he has saw, because that's the second animal, for example, that he see apart from the dog. And then later on, the child may generalize, okay, towards a big category of concepts, which is animals.
It's like assimilation.
Yeah, a little bit, okay? In second language acquisition, the process of overgeneralization occurs in most cases in generalizing grammatical rules. You can see, for example, for grammatical rules, the problem of past that we have in classrooms. We tend to teach them the simple past, the irregular verbs with ed, and then when we shift to irregular verbs, okay, so still use goat, okay, instead of went. That's because they overgeneralize the rule that they have learned, okay, towards the second rule. Interference of first language and second language is a form of generalizing. It is the incorrect application of prior first language experiences. And it is the incorrect, so here we have two definitions. We have the definition of interference, which is a generalizing of incorrect application of a first language experience, and then overgeneralization is the incorrect application of previously learned material to a current second language context. So they are both different. And then we have the inductive and deductive reasoning, which is also
chart in the book that you can use to rely on.
There's
104.
Yeah, there's the arrows.
Yes, it explains clearly the relationship between these concepts. You have transfer divided into two, as you have explained.
Yeah.
Positive, negative. Then in the subcategory of negative, it is also subdivided into two negative, which are overgeneralization, because overgeneralization is a negative manifestation of generalization.
Yeah.
Okay? And then interference is also negative. Okay? It's negative. You apply something from L1 into L2, but it doesn't work with L2. Okay? Concerning the positive, I can add the other component of generalization, transfer, positive transfer. You can have there from X, you can have generalization. For generalization is a positive, okay, phenomenon,
Manifestation, yes.
Language acquisition. Okay, do you understand? So you have to the book, page 104.
So actually, generalization and transfer and positive transfer are the positive aspects of learning, and then you have interference and overgeneralization are the negative aspects of learning. And then another aspect which is called, or another principle, inductive versus deductive reasoning. Okay, we talked about this yesterday. Okay, but they are very important in learning a second language. And there are two polar aspects of the generalization process. Okay, so we have the overgeneralization, and then we have the deductive and inductive reasoning. Okay. Actually, the two definitions for inductive reasoning, we have the storing of number of specific examples and deriving a general law or rule which generalizes those examples. Okay, and then deductive reasoning is movement from generalization to specific examples. So actually, for inductive is moving from the whole to the part. Okay, and the opposite moving from the particular part towards the generalizing on the whole. In second language classroom, it's recommended to resort to inductive reasoning or inductive teaching of grammatical structures. Okay, so it's actually moving from the whole, teaching the language itself, and then letting the learner himself or herself go deep. Okay, and try to figure out the rules by himself. And then at the end, it's recommended that we can shift again to the deductive teaching of grammar, okay, by providing the rules that the learner can rely on so as to compare and also for meaningful retention later on. Inductive reasoning encourages students to move from the whole to the part, as Gestalt said in his theory. And focus should be therefore on students communicating. So when we are teaching grammar, we have to focus. So using the inductive reasoning, okay, or inductive teaching, we actually have to focus on the encouraging the communicative production before moving to the study of discrete points of the language. So our focus as teachers should be towards promoting the communicative competence of the learners, okay, instead of focusing just on the accuracy or the linguistic competence, okay. Of course, we should not neglect the linguistic competence, but the focus should be more on communicative and then support it with the linguistic competence.
That's why almost all the textbooks that we have set up, they are organized in such a way to apply these principles. So it's always starting with communication, discussion,
Sure.
etc. And then after listening, and then etc. Then we move on to grammar. Okay.
Yeah.
Reading and then grammar. Yeah.
Thank you very much.